Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you from wherever you have joined us. Welcome to AI CoursePod webinar, where we examine and comprehend the vital role technology plays across a range of industries. I hope everyone is doing great today. As your host for the day, I'm Archana Nair from AI CoursePod. Today, we'll have yet another conversation infused with technology, navigating healthcare cybersecurity for a stronger future. Joining me today are Nitin Naveen, VP of Innovation and Strategy at AI CoursePod, and my colleagues Arvind Kannan and Naveen. Special thanks to them as they will help us make this event smooth and glitch free. On the screen joining us are esteemed guest speakers and our moderator. Allow me to give a glimpse of AI CoursePod before we get into this fascinating conversation. At AI CoursePod, we have been working to build an exceptional professional community that is centered around the latest technological developments for over 3 years. We have been gaining headway by introducing a new subject every month and providing an in-depth analysis of every tech-related industry. We prioritize industry-packed webinars, face-to-face and hybrid events, ensuring our knowledge base is built on credible data provided by esteemed industry leaders, subject matter experts, thought leaders, and our trusted partners. To shed light on the ever-evolving market, we enhance our digital material with blogs, podcasts, videos, news, and newsletters. We are excited to share all that we learn about cutting-edge technology as we explore them in the upcoming months. So stay updated with our daily news and upcoming webinars by following us on social media. For more details, visit our website at www.aicoursepod.io. We'd love your support. Don't forget to like and share our content. Without further ado, let me dive into the discussion focusing on healthcare cybersecurity. Join our expert panel as they delve into stressing the cybersecurity threats in healthcare, implementing tailored security measures, navigating regulatory requirements, and fostering a culture of cybersecurity awareness among healthcare staff. Further, if you have any questions, I request you to put them up in the question and answer section. That is a Q&A section, and our moderator, sir, will take them up as and when possible. Moving on to the speaker front, we have David Thomas, Director of Information Security Operations from Presbyterian Healthcare Services, Hugo Lay, Chief Information Security Officer from Temple University Health System, Marcus Pete, Information Security Officer from PT Solutions Physical Therapy, and Mark Johnston, VP, Global Healthcare and Life Sciences Innovation and Strategy from Infovision. Special thanks to Mark for moderating this discussion. Here is an important disclaimer. The views shared by the speakers are their personal ones. They are not related to any organization that they represent. That said, let me hand over the stage to Mark Johnston. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Ashanaya, and welcome to our Healthcare Cybersecurity webinar. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. It's a critical discussion. We're going to talk about the state of cybersecurity in the U.S. healthcare, primarily in the provider space, but everything we're going to talk about today affects everybody within healthcare, life sciences, manufacturing, banking, finance, insurance. We all face sort of the same challenges, a little different. The healthcare sector, as you know, consistently ranks as one of the top targets for cyber criminals. It's a one-stop shop, basically, if you want to think about it. And the gangs are well organized, they're well distributed, and they're technically multinational technology businesses, if you want to think of them like that, and not unorganized criminal activity. This is not by chance, because healthcare is a prime target due to the vast amount of wealth of sensitive data that we have to manage, the critical nature of our services, and we can't afford downtime. And often our complex interconnected systems can be challenging to secure comprehensively. I'm sure our guest today will talk specifically about those kind of challenges that we face and unprecedented demand in our immediate attention and action. So let's highlight some of the things before we get into this. I'm sure a lot of people are aware of these today because they're very critical and some of the largest in history. In February 2024, we witnessed what many consider to be the most significant cyber attack on U.S. healthcare system in history. Of course, I'm talking about the ransomware attack on Change Healthcare, which, as you know, is a subsidiary of United Health Group, which caused widespread disruption across the nation, and it affected everything from prescription processing to hospital cash flows, which impacted tens of millions of individuals, leaving CEOs to consider redundancy in their systems. This is not an isolated incident. In just the first half of 2024 alone, 31 million Americans have been affected by the 10 largest healthcare data breaches alone, not including Change Healthcare attack. Recently, the Kaiser Permanente reported a breach potentially affecting up to 13.4 million individuals. Concentra Health Service and SaveRx each reported incidents. And there have been 341 breaches reporting to HHS just in the last 6 months. Most recently, McLaren Hospital has been hit for the second time in less than a year. So just because you're hit one time doesn't mean you're not going to be hit again. We're seeing a disturbing evolution in these attacks. In January, cyber criminals attacked the Seattle Cancer Center, and they just didn't encrypt data. They threatened to swat patients, potentially putting lives at risk. So we're also seeing an increase in third-party vendor breaches, highlighting the need for robust supply chain security. Adding to these concerns, we've recently witnessed a significant disruption in CrowdStrike services. And while not technically a breach itself, this patch incident underscores the critical importance of reliable cybersecurity infrastructure and the potential for far-reaching impacts of any disruptions in incident response planning. We need to build security ecosystems that can withstand not only the attacks of malicious actors, which we'll talk about today, but also the potential failures of our defensive tools. In response to these challenges, Health and Human Services has taken steps to bolster our defenses in healthcare. They've released healthcare-specific cybersecurity performance goals, and they're working towards mandating essential security measures. The proposed federal budget includes $1.3 billion for hospital cybersecurity support. And let's look ahead real quick before we jump into our discussions. The cybersecurity landscape is set to become even more challenging and complex, particularly with the rapid advancement of artificial intelligence and quantum computing. Predictions are that global cybercrime damage is going to reach 10.5 trillion annually by 2025 next year. Ransomware damage costs are expected to exceed 265 billion by 2031, with attacks occurring every 2 seconds. By 2025, 200 zettabytes of data will require cyber protection, with 50% of it stored into the cloud, largely driven by digital health and telemedicine. Cumulatively, the global cybersecurity is projected to exceed 1.75 trillion, with an estimated 3.5 million cybersecurity jobs will remain unfilled globally by 2024, this year. AI will be used in 75% of healthcare cybersecurity applications, enhancing threat detection and response, which is a positive move. At the same time, the criminals will be using AI as well in their cybersecurity attacks and will account for 30% of the attacks on healthcare systems by next year. So with that, I want to jump in and let each of our esteemed panel members introduce themselves. I'll start with Marcus Pete and turn it over to you, Marcus, and then we can pass it along so our attendees have a full understanding of your responsibilities and your backgrounds. Marcus?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Mark, and thank you for the information that you shared. It's been something that we just kind of deal with on a regular basis and really have taken into account going forward. But for PT Solutions, I'm the Information Security Officer and the Senior Director of Information Security. And my role here at PT Solutions has been to evolve our security program from an information security perspective as well as a cybersecurity perspective, and continue to build out the security of our organization as we continue to grow. And that's been one of the main challenges that we've had is how do we grow successfully, securely, and move forward with it. And the strategy behind that and moving forward with that is something that I've been working through as continuing to evolve here. And from the previous background, worked as with the HVAC controls industry, worked in website development, and most importantly for me was the foundation that kind of got me there was starting in the military. And when I took many of the facets I learned in the military and applied them to the cybersecurity profession and involving against these threats and applying that tactical precision to how we move forward with what we're looking at. So looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Great. Hugo, if you'd like to go ahead.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Hugo Lai. I am the CISO at Temple Health, and I've spent the past 20 years working in cybersecurity, starting off as a security consultant, working for different government organizations, and then I moved into the healthcare space a couple of years ago. Temple Health is a healthcare organization based in northern Philadelphia. We are a 7 hospital systems providing some of the services to some of the most underserved communities in the region. And we are also have some of the very best transplant surgeons in the US, and we completed the most lung transplant cases within the US last year. So thank you.
Here you go. And David.
Thanks and good morning, afternoon, wherever you may be. So my name's Dave Thomas, and I work for Presbyterian Healthcare Systems here in New Mexico. We're the largest healthcare provider in New Mexico. We've got about 9 hospitals, countless clinics, and diagnostic labs. And so we serve about 80% of the population of New Mexico. And I serve as their Director of Information Security Operations. We've got about 18,000 employees, and that represents something in the neighborhood of 175,000 endpoints, not counting medical devices. So there's a lot to monitor, a lot to look at, and a lot to protect. Before I came into healthcare at Presbyterian, I worked for our New Mexico power utility, and I did their critical infrastructure protection. So pretty highly regulated environments, and continue to evolve. Thank you.
Appreciate that, David. And in today's discussions, we want to move from immediate threat preparedness into the human factor in cybersecurity, which is a key piece of it. We'll talk and touch on AI. And even though we look at AI, and I think the shortage gap in personnel going into the cybersecurity industry will be tempered to a degree with AI, that I think will improve that situation to a degree. At the same time, it brings some important questions. But with that, I want to start primarily on the immediate threat and preparedness piece. And David, I'm going to start and go back to you too on emerging threats. And one of the most significant, and we'll let the entire group chime in here and answer too as well. What's the most significant emerging cybersecurity threats, specifically targeting healthcare organizations, the provider side, which we're all representing here today? And also, how are those threats evolving from what you've seen in past years? And David, I'll start with you, but then we can chime in, Hugo and Marcus, as you see fit, and we'll move that question over to everybody. David?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because, you know, while it's evolving, I think ransomware seems to be the threat of the day or of the year. That seems to be what's really been the catalyst for continued threats across at least our environment, what we see. And I think what's emerging is the sophistication. It used to be pretty easy to spot malware that's coming into the system, or easy to spot threat crafted emails. But here lately, that's become rather difficult. And I think, we're going to be probably talking a lot about AI. And I think that that's one of the reasons why we're going to start to see ransomware be even more difficult to spot, more difficult to detect. And as a result, I think we're going to see more issues in the future.
Hugo, I'm sure it's very similar across all these organizations. What are you seeing? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with David that the prominent threat out there is certainly ransomware, right? And the reason is that it stops healthcare operations, and attacker knows that this is very important for us to maintain clinical operations. It impacts a patient's life, right? Quality of treatment, for example. And it really hits our pain point, right? So they understand it works. So I think that ransomwares continue to be one of those prominent threat out there in the near future. But I would also say that Mark, you touched on something earlier at the opening, is the third-party risks, right? So you've mentioned Change Healthcare, and then earlier about CrowdStrike as well. So I think that's also going to be a major threat, in the next upcoming years, that we're going to see a lot more of these type of attacks, coming through a third-party channel or supplier. Yeah.
Hugo, if I can expand on that and just ask a question too on a critical point you talked about. And CrowdStrike, as we understand it, is a patch issue, but I think it showed how vulnerable we can all be to major systems being taken advantage of and shut down, whether it's a patch or a cybersecurity incidents that we're relying on more major players, consolidated players or whatever into the industry as well. How do you viewpoint redundancy? I think a lot of people question CEOs, CIOs, CFOs. When payments were held up, obviously small providers who don't have the cash flow were in drastic need for a short period of time there until some help was brought to the table. What are thoughts on redundancy, vulnerability, based on not only this Change Healthcare, but even with the CrowdStrike patch domino effect ramification on Windows and Azure?
Right. So I think, in order for us to mitigate, some of these issues, right? Like, first off, we obviously need to make sure that we have good, detection and protection capabilities in place. But, I think NIST have been, telling us all along, right, the common security framework that, hey, in addition to what we are doing in proactively protecting our infrastructures, our environment, we also need to make sure that we're investing and looking into the resilience capability of the organization. And I think that is going to be more important. And I see that to be the shift, right? Like, there's going to be more focus and more resources spending on making sure that the organization can actually survive an attack, right? Let alone, just recover. But I think, in the immediate timeline is that you need to make sure that your organization is able to survive first, right? Before you can think about recovery. So there's going to be a lot of discussions, around, okay, how do we make sure that the organization are equipped, with that capability, and how do we make sure that our clinicians are prepared, when technologies are down, right? We're talking about basically going back to Stone Age, right? Your phones are not working, your emails are not working, nothing is working, right? At that time, what are you going to do? Are you prepared when an incident like that happened? Do we have a business continuity procedures, in place to make sure that everyone understands, how to operate when that happens?
And Marcus, we've covered and evolved into another area here we think is critical. And David, so Marcus, I wanted to get your inputs and your perspective in PT with your organization.
Yeah, so I think that both of what they've said, the ransomware as well as supply chain risk management, for my organization, it takes a little bit more of a different connotation because the way that our model, we are very distributed. I've got 570 clinics across 25 states, and most of my clinics were outpatient facilities. And so in some cases, you'll find us next to Walmart or next to Publix or next to the shoe store because we're just, we're out in the community. So my edge is really the biggest threat for ransomware, and just somebody walking in with something affect me there. And then the supply chain, not just the vendors and things that we work with, but our relationships with some of these hospitals, like you pointed out, Change and the Ascension, the attack that happened to them.
Right.
That for me, that would be almost, we kind of treat them as supply chain or third party risk because we're partners with those organizations, and what happens to them affects my business continuity and my patient care, things from that perspective. And so when we look at some of those aspects and securing my edge and securing the resiliency behind what they're doing, rapidly reacting to something like that has definitely been something there. But how do we get there? And so the way that I'm kind of trying to approach it is to really lean hard into tabletop exercises, business impact analysis, and scenarios. And in some cases, I'm looking at kind of following what Netflix did, where they purposely break things within their environment to test to see how well they do, because we can talk about it. We can talk about how we're going to do. We can sit around, and I kind of liken it to Dungeons and Dragons, where the dungeon master says, this is what happens, and we roll the dice, right? But we have to actually put it into practice to see if it actually will work. And so that's kind of where we're headed to next, is how do we test our theories and prove them from that standpoint? So I think that so far that's where I'm trying to take 2025.
And to all whoever wants to jump out and take it first, I'd like to focus a little bit more on third-party risk and how you're any innovative approaches there. I mean, there's BAs and agreements, right? Those are agreements and guidelines. And beyond that, I mean, what kind of things are happening with your third-party vendors to reassure your organization that you're as secure as possible and mitigating this? It's all about mitigating risk, right? We've seen multiple attacks on organizations there, and all of you come from very sophisticated, large organizations. And I've mentioned some of the largest with the most resources deployed, yet they're attacked, different vectors, but attacked multiple times. So this is just an ongoing problem that we're all going to have to chase and deal with as we go forward. But how are you managing third-party risks? Anybody that wants to start that, I think it's an important area that we need to delve into a little bit. If there's any innovative ways you're focusing now on that beyond BAAs.
And this is David here. I think one of the things that we learned from the Change Healthcare attack is that we were not aware of all the places we were affected by Change Healthcare. They had, their tentacles touched everything. And I think as a result, we took a step back and realized that we were going to have to invest in not just maybe tools to figure out where all those connections are, but in people to, maybe refocus some of our attention on these third-party risks. For instance, we've at Presbyterian, we've experienced probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 16 third-party incidents that have affected us in some way. And so we realized pretty quickly that, we're going to have to think about how we're looking at these third-party risks, because those of what have affected us more than direct attacks. And so we've invested on getting some new personnel, on some new tools, and starting to figure out exactly where all these third-party interconnections are. And I think that's the first thing you've got to do. You can't protect what you don't know.
Great point. Hugo, large organization, I'm sure you were affected by the Change Healthcare disruption, and your lessons learned or any surprises, anything you've changed. Interested to get your thoughts there as well.
Yeah, so my organization is no different than David's, and I would say that most healthcare organizations right nowadays, we are hyper connected. We have a gazillion third parties that we're integrated with, from medical devices to third parties. So I would say that when an incident happened that impacts a third party, right, the first thing that we need to do is to understand, what business units are being impacted and what type of operations are being impacted. And unfortunately, that often takes up the majority of the time, during the initial investigation phase, right? There are sometimes smaller third-party vendors, you never heard of their names, right? And then also like through acquisitions, it makes it, identifying that initial impact to be even that much more challenging, right? For Change, it's like, okay, does it acquired, by Optum and then, through United, and, some of the naming conventions that you have that are used internally, sometimes they were ages ago and does not reflect, the most relevant names that you have out there. So I think having a good inventory of your third parties, I think it's a good step, and making sure that you have good descriptions of, some of the services that are being provided by the third party. And as far as mitigations or lessons learned, I would say that I don't have anything innovative that to provide, right? Anytime that we're dealing with a third party, I think we just have to assume there's going to be certain risks, and the question is going to be, are we comfortable with that risks? And when something happens, do we have the right information in place to contain and mitigate that risk? I think that's going to be the questions moving forward. And I, have, several discussions or, webinars that talk about third-party risks in the past. If I have to do work, right, to understand whether a third party is providing adequate security, then I think that's already something wrong in that process, right? Like, we have to assume that's going to be risk. The question is, are we comfortable, right, with that to start off with, right? So that would be my comments on those topics.
Those are great points. David, Marcus, anything regarding inventory of third-party partners to add to that?
For that, I mean, I just like David, when change happened, it was an eye-opening experience to understand a little bit more about what exactly do I have? Where are all my connections? What are our second and third order, fourth order effects? We go back to 6 degrees of separation. Where am I with relation to this? And then how many steps am I willing to take to mitigate risk? And of course, we have to balance it. But it was eye-opening to understand how many different verticals were affected by one particular partnership. And in some cases, it wasn't a direct partnership. It was, we went through this person to get to change. And because they were down, their core business model was solely wrapped up in change. And then because they couldn't function, we lost part of our ability to function. So in evaluation of what those are, visibility is probably the biggest thing I would say. Gaining visibility, understanding where those connections are. And like Hugo said, how many different ways does these corporate entities and LLCs and subsidiaries and business names and all of those types of things, how do they fit in? But more so logically, how do we connect? So a big push for me has been to get logical diagrams of how my data is flowing. How are our relationships connected logically? And it's not necessarily revolutionary. I think it's like Hugo said, for us, it's going back to the basics, right? We go back to understanding. When I grew growing up in IT, it was, you always had a network topology map. You always built everything that you saw and you put everything there. Now you have to apply security to it. But the premise is still the same. We need visibility at a glance, at a moment's notice, especially in security, because if I have a problem, I don't need to try to figure it out. I need to see where it might be potentially broken and start applying things there. And so going along with the visibility, you all kind of alluded to it. For us, there's going to be a big push on revamping our CMDB and understanding exactly what those cases are to make sure that we not only have it, we have the visibility, but we have a centralized place and everybody starts to reference it. So it's a lot of back to basics with all of the push about HIPAA. Some of these other things, yes, those are great, those are revolutionary, but if we lose sight of the foundation, then we lose sight of our core way to move forward. It's still 5 volts running around a motherboard. So how do we continue to make sure that all of those things are still contained therein? So that's for us, that's kind of where we've seen it as identification and always my rapidly evolving and changing edge. I wish it were a straight line, but it's more like the edge of the continent in some cases. So
those are great points. And Marcus, you had mentioned your distribution, and obviously with Hugo and with David, large organizations, health organizations distributed with ambulatory locations. I mean, pretty massive as well, doing the same thing. But let's go back for you too on inventory and any realizations after maybe Change Health that made you rethink anything. I'm not sure that anything's innovative that we can talk about. Anything different in your methodology of thinking, or you brought to the table, or anything you're doing?
Yeah, so it's innovative to our organization. It's the kind of coming and helping the realization that we need to dive a little bit deeper, and it's more about relationship. Let's get a little bit more in depth with our partners, and let's work together to identify where those connections are. And so when you have, it's not that I want to steal your business, we want to just learn everything about you, that we don't trust you, it's we want to partner with you so that we can understand if it's a limitation on your part, that's fine. Let's continue the relationship, but we need to plan our defense in depth strategy from a resiliency standpoint. And how does that work? Do I start investing capital? For example, if we have our EMR provider and our EMR goes down, or the EMR for the partner goes down, do we stand up the one that we use in-house and have a separate database on standby to facilitate the ability to see patients? Their organization may have been affected, but that doesn't mean patients can't come into a PT Solutions clinic and receive care and receive treatment. We want to make sure that we're always there for the patient. So how do we build and how do we pivot? And then, of course, on the back end, everything needs to go back based on relationships and ETL and HL7 and all those other API connections and things like that. How do we facilitate the business side of getting back to normalizing operations? So we're really taking a hard look at some of those things and how do we build warm sites, reduce our mean time to mean maximum tolerable downtime, and how do we improve our recovery time and pivot to our BCP and move over, but making sure that it's seamless for the patient, because the patient sees 15 breaches a day. And it's not just in healthcare, it's AT&T, it's Chipotle, it's McDonald's, and every day the patient is hearing more and more about it. With CrowdStrike, the worldwide news was talked about CrowdStrike being down. So that's all the average consumer and patient knows is I see what's on the news and I believe it. How do I mitigate and provide transparency at the same time, bolstering our reputation to ensure that we are always a trusted entity? So that's kind of where we pivoted with a lot of these things.
You bring up some good points, and it takes me back to, and we've had this conversation in the past, is as a society, for the most part, we wake up every morning, and most of us, some of us, weekly maybe or monthly, get a notification that there's been a breach in some part of the business we conduct in our lives, personal lives, right? Affects us in some manner or form with our finances or our telecom provider or whatever it may be. That I've seen us change from a society that's no longer surprised, because it's not if this is going to happen, it's when is it going to happen. And for some provider groups, it's twice in the same year, which seems incredible, but that's the environment I think we all live in. So my question, and David, I'll throw this to you, but I think I want to hear from everybody, is can you walk us through your incident response plans for a major breach? And we can maybe start from there and have a conversation to understand, because again, it's not if we're going to get attacked, it's when, and some people multiple times.
Yeah, and when you say when, I think that the important thing is to plan for it, and be ready for it before it happens. One of the things that we've done is we've emphasized being able to have playbooks created that we can follow, anyone can follow, especially in our our cybersecurity incident response team. They have the ability to have all that information in front of them. We've identified. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I didn't want to lose that thought, and then ask a follow-up question to that too. Is how often is that reviewed within the organization? The playbook.
We do a review twice a year on those particular playbooks. The reason is because something's going to change within those playbooks at any given time. So right now we've identified about 16 major incidents, from third-party vendor incidents all the way to virus outbreaks. And anything in between, and for things that we can't, that we don't have specifically identified as a playbook that you can follow, we of course use the NIST SP 800 standards, and those are all broken down into flowcharts. So if a major incident happens, from incident detection, we start following these workflows, and those workflows touch everybody from our legal teams, compliance teams, even our marketing teams. So all those groups are involved, and all those people have a part to play within our cybersecurity incident response team. And it's just a lot of planning. And we have at least one large-scale tabletop a year to test these plans. And then we have smaller tabletops with different groups throughout the year, and that can range from anywhere from 2 to 6, depending on what trying to get folks together, which is really complicated. We've got a major one planned, I think, in December of this year. So a lot of planning, making sure that business continuity, and we've been talking about that. And from an organizational standpoint, we've been trying to invest and focus on a lot of those business continuity practices, including downtime procedures. In the Change Healthcare, great example, we found lots of gaps in our downtime procedures plans. And so those were highly changed.
You never want to be exposed to a significant event like the Change Healthcare, but again, lessons learned, incorporated, a wake-up call to many to take a look and change methodologies. Hugo, I'm sure it's very similar. Are there tabletop exercises or simulations to test your response plans? I'm sure you do. Very similar?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think our approach to this is to work very closely with the SOC team, right, to make sure that our day-to-day operations are being incorporated into the incident response plan. I think, a lot of the effort has been spent to make sure that, we are fine-tuning our processes, because, anything when I like to use, some of the day-to-day events that we have seen to make sure that, we are able to make continuous improvements, into our RRP. Developing the playbooks are good, but I think, unless we also spend time in making sure that, when an event is being triggered, how are we, the team, the internal team is spending the time, are the tools, reporting the events correctly, right? Are we able to reach out to the business units, have the right information? And also, are we able to collaborate, with external parties? I think those are often very critical information and processes that we are trying to fine tune to make sure that, we have a good IRP in place. And then we're also spending a lot of time, making sure that we're doing validated assessments, just to make sure that our control stays effective, right? Yeah.
Thanks for that. And Marcus, your incident response plan and exercises or simulations, and how you incorporate those.
We're trying to revamp it because of some of the change, and like David said, it exposed a lot of different things. And what are we trying to do? And we learned that what I want to do is involve more of my clinical counterparts, right? For me, because we're so distributed, I can't be in everywhere at once. And so centralized disaster recovery and incident response is part of it, but a majority of it, I need to get out to the actual clinics themselves. So how do I make it easier to get buy-in at the clinical level from a therapist who doesn't care to know about technology, and they in some cases, they don't know how to get through their iPhone as well. That's not nothing against them. That's nothing against their knowledge. That's just not what they do. But I need them in order to help prevent something larger from happening. So I'm getting buy-in. So getting things on a non-technical level. So like putting a book behind you or at the front desk where I should just say code blue or code orange. You can go to that book and flip to the orange section, and it just gives you very straightforward things to do. Here's who you call it. Here's what I need you to do. Here's what to say. So getting some of those things in and starting to incorporate the tabletops from that standpoint. The strategy behind the scenes from the centralized location is I need better and more responsive run books and playbooks. And so we're looking at leveraging a lot more of the automated response. If the attackers are monitoring Patch Tuesday to get whatever bulletin has been released, almost like a Twitter bot does screen scrapes on tweets to bring back up 10 years later, if they're using that to scrub the vulnerability as it's being published, and before everybody else in the world actually gets around to doing the Patch Tuesday fix, AI is writing their code for them so they can exploit it. I need to be able to react in the same fashion. So being able to at least dynamically posture ourselves to get some of the more prevalent things and really, how do we prevent the 0-day style of those attacks? And that would be, it's more based on behavior. 0-day by definition, you don't know about. So there's no signature, there's no data there, but heuristically you can identify when there are changes, and balancing that change between something that's expected and something that's unexpected, and leveraging some of those AI tools to help with our response teams. That's really where my focus has been, is how do I get almost to a machine related response, but oversight from a human companion. And we're training it, we're training the model, we're training the efficiency so we can respond based on behavior. My biggest threat is still the human element. So and humans are very unpredictable, but I can work on patterns for the information that they do and perceive from a centralized standpoint. And that's going to be built into our run books. And really taking advantage of that, SOAR light style capability. I don't have full orchestration. I'm still not there yet. I don't know that I trust it fully yet, but I'm working through to get some of that functionality to make sure that we're responding at the same time. I want to be as proactive as I can rather than reactive. And reactive, I don't want to be poignant and targeted with my reaction based on data and visibility. So that's where we're headed in that direction.
Makes sense. A critical piece of all this, even we're going to talk a little bit about AI. We've touched a little on the edges through the conversation so far. I know a lot of people are interested in that. We will talk a little bit about it. But prior to that, what's a key factor, even though probably by 2026, 75% of healthcare cybersecurity applications will incorporate some form of AI, human factors are critical on both sides of cybersecurity. Insider threat mitigation. Wanted focus in a little bit, Hugo, on insider threat mitigation, and kind of what approaches you're taking to address insider threats at your organization.
Right. Insider threats, they are very difficult to tackle, right? Marcus, you mentioned that these are human elements. So we can leverage, for example, like behavior analysis, that type of thing to help us, with the initial detection. But the challenge there is that it generates a ton of false positives, right? And you also have to work very closely, with your legal team, with HR, to understand, the human elements of it, because there's often a trigger when we talk about a insider threat, right? What makes this individual all of a sudden, turn malicious, right? So we have to understand those trigger points. But unless you have the data, it's going to be very difficult, to detect it. Is it because of a financial reason? Is it because of a family reason, divorce or whatsoever, right? But unless we have those data, we're not going to make detection very effective. So in my mind, yes, we are doing some things to make sure that, we have the capability, to detect when an insider threat happens, but it's more along the lines of, understanding the potential impact that the individual can do to the organization, right? It's not going to be down to a level of, okay, looking at the minor things, which the individual can or cannot do, but it's really, okay, is the individual trying to extract a large amount of data? Is the individual trying to implant, a backdoor into the organization, right? Or, trying to sell the account, to an adversary. So those are the type of things that, we would spend a little bit more focus on, rather than, just picking up, okay, unauthorized logins from unfamiliar locations, that type of thing. So, but we're definitely leveraging a bit of an AI, in detecting, some of these incidents or events. Yeah.
And David, your organization?
Yeah. And for me, one of the things that I think about is I think of insider threats even being those folks that aren't being malicious, but they just don't know anything. And we see a whole lot of that. That seems to be the lion's share of insider threats. And so we're trying to focus a whole lot on training, making sure our training is effective, so people know how they should operate and function within an organization. And that can be a difficult thing to do. And as Hugo said, it's gathering all that data, and being able to use that data to figure out exactly, well, what kind of training do we need to provide? I think everyone's got to do phishing training, and I think that has become less and less effective over the years. It's just not. It's either not getting through, or people just they're busy, and it's just we're not seeing the results that we'd like to see from the phishing training. So we're looking at different avenues of how can we develop onboarding better. So when we hire folks, they've got a better understanding of what we expect. And again, just trying to take it from a focus of a training exercise, and getting effective communication and effective training out to our large employee base.
And Hugo mentioned it, and we'll get back to it. Again, AI popped up on, I'm sure everybody's using it to some degree. But here on insider threat detection, we obviously know, I think Hugo mentioned it, I believe at the start, The adversaries are using AI. They're getting a lot better and spoofing. They look more credible. They've got a lot more intel maybe on the individuals they're targeting. Are you seeing that? I'm assuming that you're seeing a much more sophisticated approach when it comes to exploiting your employees.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
you know,
definitely.
go ahead. You go. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a lot more of these like phishing activities or spoofing attempts, and I would say that, try to stay ahead, right, of the game. We know the adversaries is going to continue using the same method because they are effective, right? And if you have bombarded enough number of employees, there will just be one or two, or a few who click on that link or provide that information. So I think, David, when you mentioned about security awareness training, I would say that continues to be our effort because yes, there are certain types of trainings that are not very effective, but I believe it has to do more with how we're delivering that training to our staff members, right? So, for example, in a healthcare organizations, guess what? Your nurses is not going to use email. They don't check their emails, right? That's not what they do on a regular basis. So you have to figure out a different mechanisms and channels to deliver those type of messages, to your clinical staff, right? So I think by leveraging different types of communication channels and different types of trainings, we're able to get the message out and still be somewhat effective. I won't say that it's always 100%, but at least we'll help ourselves and get to a better place where we need to.
You had a point.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Yeah, I think Hugo's exactly right. Training is not a one size fits all, and that's what we've discovered. And so, trying to figure out how we can deliver training to reduce those insider threats, it's a challenge, but we're working on it.
And it's evolving. Everything that everybody in this panel has to deal with is continually evolving. Marcus, I want to get your thoughts on training and effectiveness of the training, channels to deliver the communications, what you're doing.
So I like to, I've always considered myself a security evangelist in any organization that I'm a part of. And I say that because I genuinely want people to understand just enough about it because it helps with how we get things done. So some of the avenues that I'm approaching, I don't want to find out what drives them. Coming to work and helping patients and things like that may be part of their core desire to be a PT solution, but they're also mothers, they're also fathers, they're aunts, they're uncles. So what do we do to help them protect the children that they're shepherding or they're raising? So we go to do things like we host after hours events for helping your child. How do you keep your child safe online? What are some of the dangers on YouTube? What apps should you look out for? Partnering with local law enforcement to bring some of those things in and showcase that security is all around us and something that we want to look at. So when we talk about training, yes, I do the mandatory HIPAA training and the security awareness training and the phishing training, but also looking at evolving some of that. One of the vendors that I've looked at recently targets individual, and I get an individual radar graph on every person that takes a phishing exam, and I understand what areas they're faltering in. So if they're more susceptible to social engineering attacks, we try to help them build that up. If they're more susceptible to finance scams, we build them up on that. But targeting make it an individualized approach. And then lastly, with the generation that we're coming into the workforce now, grew up with having achievements or gratitude, instant gratification or instant recognition of something that they've done or that they have. How do we bolster that? Because it's already ingrained in what they've gone through. So bringing that out, giving them the ability to have bragging rights, offering $25 Amazon gift cards for the best phishing scorers, the fastest phishing spot, and involving the trainings, doing like videos and Kahoot games and doing like, for example, when we're coming up on Cybersecurity Month, making a big push, all sorts of things. I'm right now going through with my CEO, we're revising the script to do it, he calls it his address to the organization and doing a security interview about some of the more recent events in cybersecurity and putting those things out there. But I find that when I make it personal, I tend to get a better result rather than what we call, FUD campaigns and that evolves over into a lot of how we're approaching the training in many different avenues. My learning and development department, we've already planned the entire 2025 year. I've got themes for each quarter and themes for each month, and they're partnering with us to do micro trainings to make it so that we get the message out across the board. Because again, it's just about education. And you may not catch everything at all the time, but at the same time, it's no longer just your work email that's getting affected. You're getting bombarded on LinkedIn. They're finding your personal cell phone number, and all of a sudden the CEO is tweeting you about going to get gift cards. So it's the landscape and how they're approaching it is changing. So I can't just focus on just the work side of it. I have to take it into the personal side, because for me, I produce a better result on my work professional side, because now you're protecting all the way around. And so that's kind of how my holistic approach to that training and awareness comes in.
That's a great point. Over the last decade or more, we've seen a move for us as for the general population to move more into the social end of the internet and provide so much of our personal information that can be exploited by bad actors for all these different areas. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the balance that you have to create here to everybody on this group, and anybody can jump in here too, because I work with a lot of the clinical side, large IDNs, ambulatory surgical centers, even I've done with small provider groups. The common thread from the clinical staff is interesting in that they understand how important security is to the organization. At the same time, they find it challenging that they want to deliver care to the patient. That's what they're there for. That's what their heart's in to do. Yet they understand the needs for cybersecurity, although sometimes they believe it infringes on their ability to, in their workflows, to do what they need to do. How do you balance that? Anybody can take that up. It's got to be impactful to everybody on this panel that they have that challenge with balancing what they're implementing versus workflows or people's own personal belief in delivery of care to patients.
I think that needs to be ingrained, right, with the culture of the organization, particularly for the information security team. Anytime that we are designing security controls, right, I think the first thing that we need to look at is not actually how to secure our environment, it's how it's going to be impacting our users, right? So we need to look at from that perspective first, and then wrapped around, okay, how are we going to make sure that we're putting the security context into place, right? So every time that we're implementing something, that needs to be the very first question. It's how is it going to impact the environment, and if there's change impacting our users, how do we back it out, and what are some of the things that we can do, or what are some of the alternate methods that we can use to achieve the same results, but without impacting our users or impacting less, right? So this is particularly important for healthcare, because our physicians are being, overworked, right? Like we often talked about, like how many hours that they're spent, into documentations, every click, everything, every little thing counts, right? So we have to understand their challenge, and make sure that when we are trying to secure an environment, we consider their workflows and feelings as
well. Yeah, and those are great points, because one of the things that, we're security folks, and security folks, if it was up to me, I'd block everything, and I don't think that would fly very long and very far. And, as we try to implement zero trust framework within the organization, that's exactly the first thing that we've been saying. How are we going to impact the clinical staff when we implement these security controls? And many of these security controls are counterintuitive to day-to-day operations from a clinical point of view. And so we're just looking at ways where we can implement these controls, but nobody knows they've been implemented. And that's the challenge. That's the difficulty, because especially with the zero trust framework, it's zero trust. We're immediately not trusting anything, people, devices, anything. And so it's we're still on the drawing board with that, because we still have issues today where we've got really restrictive controls, and it's directly affecting our clinical staff, and we need to eliminate that. And it's not easy.
Points. Marcus, your thoughts on balance?
Yeah, so One of my most spectacular failures that I have, and I say spectacular because it failed miserably, but it was because I took the former approach of not including who I was, the audience I was building something for. I just went into solution mode and I thought this was a perfect solution and it was just going to be great and it's going to work and everybody's going to love it. And then nobody could use it because I didn't take into account talking to anyone first. And so that's where it was a very hard lesson to learn, but I'm so thankful that I was able to learn it. Because when we put in these controls, there's a reason that somebody did X. We'll take passwords, for example. Everybody knows and has seen in the security industry the password under the keyboard on the sticky note. And in some cases, they get so bold as to, even take a label maker and print out the password and put it on the monitor. Why are they doing that? And then understanding the use case, understanding and having empathetic conversations to gain the why. And then when we start looking at that, how do we mesh the why with our objective? That's kind of where I've been on what I call an emotional intelligence journey since I left active duty. Because in active duty, I didn't have to have that. It was do X, do Y, get it done. I'll be back, embrace the cycle, let's move on. You can't do that in every environment. It doesn't work outside of the military for the most part, unless you're in that type of environment. So understanding and taking into account someone's idea of why that works for them, what makes it work for them. You can't do it for everything, but in some of the larger cases, take a sampling of what makes it there, come back, because when you put out the solution, like Hugo mentioned, there's a reason that there's something that will work for the majority if you design it based around solving the need. And if you never find out the need or the need behind the need or the why, your solution may not work. And in security, what we put out there, we want to make sure that we value add because we're not revenue generating. So anything that we put out there, we must have some sort of buy-in and partnership, not just with our vendors, but partnership with our I call them our customers, is something that we need to take into account. Listening to the why. It maybe you may hear something that you just know is completely off the wall, but you took time to hear them out. You took time to understand and hear from their perspective. That goes a long way into getting your initiatives that I found across, because now there's buy-in for them. He listened to me. You know what he said made sense. I want to take a personal investment and make sure that I do something different. So we're kind of looking at it from that standpoint to really get buy-in from our constituents or our customers and work towards benefiting them overall.
Great points. Thank you for that too. And with our remaining time, I want to make sure we move into evolving technologies and their security implications, and that's going to be generated around AI and ML. And AI-driven cyber attacks are going to account for 30% of attacks on systems by next year. They're getting more sophisticated, difficulty to detect at the same time. On our side, right, AI-powered systems are expected to reduce threats and response times by about 50% in the next couple of years. So what I want to ask each panel member to elaborate on, and it answers kind of a question that we've been thrown from the audience as well, is how are you leveraging AI and machine learning to enhance your cybersecurity efforts currently, if you're doing so? Hugo, do you want to start with that?
Sure. Yeah. So I do believe, it takes a certain maturity level, right, of the security team to be able to leverage or deploy, AI or, machine learning to your team. But that's more like a question that I often ask, to my security vendors, right? Like, are you leveraging AI? Are you leveraging ML, to make sure that we stay ahead of the game? Because like internally, we do not have the expertise, or the time and resources, to maintain, like these AI, models, on our own, right? And we're not Microsoft, right? Like if we're getting to that maturity level, and I think, that becomes a question too, right? Like, are we overspending in cybersecurity? But that is certainly something that I'm asking, my security vendors all the time, right? And if they are not, I would ask the questions like, why not? But the other thing that I want to point out to AI is that, oftentimes these are, more like automation, right? Like when a vendor say that they are doing AI, what they're really doing is automation. So we need to make sure that we are separating the two, right? And making sure that the logic is sound as well, because Microsoft actually a long time ago they already thought about AI and ML, in some of the solutions, but they were false positives, right? So if you're just blindly, relying on the results, just delivered by these solutions, sometimes it's going to fire back. So you need to look at those, solutions very carefully.
Appreciate that. David, in your organization, I know it's, I mentioned maturity was mentioned. I think some organizations are more mature than others, and just now experimenting. Your thoughts on AI and ML utilization within the organization to address these issues?
And I think from a maturity standpoint, I agree with Hugo. We don't have within our environment, within our staff, the necessary knowledge that it really takes to utilize some of these tools. And we're relying on our vendors an awful lot to figure out exactly what they're doing, how they're using it. And we have tools, we have detection tools that have AI capabilities. And I think I agree with Hugo in that these aren't really true AI models. They're really a whole lot of automation. There's a lot of pattern recognition, things of that nature that are helpful. And I think we're going to have that in the future as these large language models get more advanced, as we look at more newer tools that are being developed. We'll use those, but we're going to have to, we got to balance that with how much money are we going to spend, what's going to be the real cost at the end of the day. I know for a few of the tools that we are piloting, for lack of a better word, we're looking at those compute costs, because some of these things rely on compute cycles, and what's that going to really look like 2 years from now. And so we're in the beginning stages of just trying to figure out, I think like a lot of people, just trying to figure out how these tools can augment what we do today.
Thanks for that, David. And Marcus, any thoughts there across AI and ML, either currently or future outlook for you?
Yes, sir. So for us, there's kind of an internal way of looking at it, and I would say a third-party way of looking at it. From a security, I look at it all, but what we're looking at from an internal perspective is how do we use it to increase efficiency? So like David, we are piloting several different iterations of it through from the standpoint of automatically creating summarization of notes with patients and seeing how that looks and how that works, and getting some of the things that can go into an EMR. And if I take that away from the therapist in terms of ensuring that they don't necessarily have to type everything, but they can see more patients per day, which equals more revenue and things like that from a business standpoint. So looking at that from one aspect of it, and then how do we, from a data analytics perspective, can we get real-time numbers and crunching numbers and things? That's more on the automation. As long as we feed the thing and it kind of consumes it and spits something back out, that's one thing from there. From a security focused side, I really like the ability for AI to produce natural language queries against my data tools. So if I'm ingesting everything in my SIM, and my information security analyst can ask without having to learn SQL or jQuery or JSON or any of those other languages that they're going to use, or KQL queries that we have to use for in Microsoft world to just kind of navigate and get information and present it. If I lower that barrier, I get more enhancement. And for my team, I look at AI, and I'm a Star Trek and a Star Wars nerd. And so for me, using AI is like Captain Picard on the deck of the Starship Enterprise saying computer, and he says something and the computer does X, Y, or Z. It's an enhancement tool. It is there to help bolster what you already know. It is not there to replace. It's not there to replace you. It's there to continue that piece. And I think that for me, in the tools that we're evaluating, having that there, having the ability for AI to come in and look at the data that's of course present for our environments, and then building queries and understanding and information from that is how we're going to proceed forward. I don't see a way to not embrace it. To me, AI is like the 5G conversation, right? Nobody's truly 5G, but everything was labeled 5G. Now everything's labeled AI. So how do we decipher it? How do we employ it correctly? Because our business partners, all they see is AI, and AI is going to revolutionize the world. How do we do it? CEOs, they come to you and say, I want AI. Great. What exactly do you want? I just want it to work. I want to be able to get AI. And then there's not much more to that, but they know what they've seen. So taking that, putting it into requirements, and then seeing how we do it, more importantly, securely, because there's so much unexplored with AI. You look at some of the regulations, like the EU just ratified their AI Act. How that's going to change the face of AI as we go forward anyway. So looking at that and understanding some of these things, there's going to be changes to it. But ultimately, I think we as providers and practitioners, embracing it is going to be something that will benefit us more than not.
Points, good points. It's racing quickly. I understand the drive from C-level to implement AI across different channels. I think they're also looking for where's the real ROI there. So that's a whole nother conversation that we got to have. We barely got into what we wanted to cover today. With that, Hugo, if you want to lead us and we'll let everybody go, any closing thoughts we can impart to the audience today before we close out?
Well, thank you, Mark, and I want to appreciate the opportunity, to participate in this webinar. I think I learned, just as much as everybody else. As a closing thought, I do feel that, one thing that is continuously going to happen in the cybersecurity space is, there's just going to be new emerging threats, right? So as an organization, you just need to stay nimble and build a cybersecurity program that would adapt, to some of these emerging threats.
Yeah, and I think that's very good points. I think that as we move forward, we're going to see the threats get more sophisticated. We're going to see the adversaries get more stealthy, and it's just going to be really difficult to start to detect and respond to things in the future. Having said that, I know that the cybersecurity community is robust. Lots of trainings, lots of webinars. This is an example. And so we're a tight-knit community, lots of collaboration, lots of information sharing, especially for healthcare, HISACs, just one example. And I think utilizing those and helping each other, that's how we're going to stay ahead of the game.
Great community, great response. Marcus, before we close out, your thoughts?
Yeah, so again, kind of echoing what they've said, I think the ability for having webinars like this to share information, share insights, by no means do we say that, we know it all, we know everything, but the ability to provide that assistance and share our ideas and hear more ideas and how others are doing it changes their perspective on how we're moving forward. So as we leave today, it kind of, I have a Be Unstoppable, which is our motto as an organization. For the organization, it means to help our patients become unstoppable before they, when they came to see us, they were something that brought them to us. We need to want to return them to that unstoppable state. From a security perspective, I've ingrained that into how do we remain unstoppable as an organization. Our goal is to try to do that through security. But it's not just me that can do it. It's going to take a village. It's going to take talkings, collaboration, the communities that we're a part of, because I don't know everything. And I won't know everything, and there's too much to know to be out there. So how do we continue to do that? I think these types of events are crucial to that, and having more and continuing to join and share these ideas and knowledge will be how we move forward together.
Fantastic panel today. I'm grateful to everybody that joined us. I'm going to turn it back over to Ashanaya. It's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, speakers. We would like to express our appreciation to all of the participants in this discussion, which offered a forum for knowledge development. Thank you to our community partners and attendees. We extend our gratitude to panel speakers and moderator for their outstanding contributions and for their willingness to get together to offer their insightful opinions. Further, if you feel you missed something and wish to look back at the session, let me tell you that today's event was live on our company's YouTube page, so you can see the recording anytime. And if you are looking out for recent technological updates and advancements, log on to our website and social media channels. We will share cutting-edge topic discussions, details, and announcements of the next events, which will help you register and attend them. Furthermore, if there is much more in store for this year with a focus on banking, finance, insurance, telecom, retail, and more. So remember, we want to hear from you, know what you would like to hear from us, and stay connected. It was a sheer pleasure bringing this session to you, and we hope that you enjoyed it as much as we did. So till we meet again, take care and good day. Thank you.
Thank you, AI Course Spot.
Thank you. Thank you.